Backroads explored Australia's natural wonders and wild animals not seen anywhere else. The Backroads of Australia, a special encore presentation, tonight at 12:30 on Prawn Channel 4.
Hey, everyone, look. Oh.
Ooh.
My name is Mary Beth Miller. I went to the Kentucky School for the Deaf, KSD.
Hey, I went to KSD too.
I didn't see you there.
I'm Pat Raybill. And I graduated from the Kansas School for the Deaf, KSD. And you?
Well, I'm Bill Ennis, and I'm from the Texas School for the Deaf, TSD.
My name is Freda Norman, and I went to the Virginia School for the Deaf, VSD.
And my name is Lou Fant. I'm not deaf, but my parents were deaf. They graduated from the South Carolina School for the Deaf.
We are construction workers.
And we build.
And we create.
And we paint.
We construct
Stories. And our stories are called
H-G-H-5. High five.
The boys and the frogs. Now a group of boys were playing near a pond in which lived a family of frogs. As the frogs sat peacefully on their lily pads, the boys decided that it would be fun to skip stones across the pond. One of the boys claimed that he was really good, and he threw the first stone. The others were quite impressed, and they began throwing stones. The stones narrowly missed the poor frogs, who were scared to death. Well, one of the frogs, the oldest and the bravest frog, swam over to the edge of the pond and spoke to the boys.
Harumph! Now, would you children stop playing like that, throwing stones across the pond? It's mean and it's dangerous. I know it's fun and you're just having a good time, but while you're playing around, if those stones were to hit me or anyone in my family, it would kill us.
What we learn from this is that it's important to think twice when you're playing around. What you think is playing could end up hurting someone. What we learn from this is that it's important to think twice when you're playing around. What you think is playing could end up hurting someone.
The goat, the kid, and the wolf. One day, as the baby goat was playing outside, the mother goat came up and said, "I have to go shopping now, but I'm a bit worried that the wolf might be lurking about. So I don't want you to go out and play outside anymore. Go into the house and stay there. And if anyone comes to the door, you ask them to tell you what kind of animal a wolf is, good or bad. If it's a goat at the door, well, then they'll answer that wolves are terrible, they're bad, or something like that, and then you'll know it's a goat and can open the door and let them in." The kid promised to remember. The mother goat kissed the kid, showed it into the house, locked the door, and left to go shopping. Now, it happened that there was a wolf lurking behind the trees who saw and heard everything that had happened. The wolf figured he knew exactly how to get in the house and catch that little goat. So the wolf went up to the door of the house and knocked on it. And the little goat said, "What kind of an animal is a wolf, good or bad?" The wolf answered with a lie, "A wolf is a bad, terrible, and mean thing. You can't trust a wolf. You just can't." Now, even though the answer was correct, the little goat had a feeling that something wasn't right. So the kid told the wolf to go to the window and put his paws on the windowsill so the little goat could see them. And so the wolf did. He placed his paws on the windowsill, and the little goat looked at the paws, which were brown, like a wolf's, not white like a goat's. And he knew that this was no goat. This was a wolf, and so the kid didn't let him inside. And what we learn from this story is a single proof is good, but a double proof is much better. The goat, the kid, and the wolf. Now, once there was a baby goat who was deaf. And this little goat was playing outside when the mother goat came up and said to him, in signs, "Now, I have to go shopping now, but I'm a little bit worried that the wolf might show up, so I want you to go into the house and stay there. Now, if a deaf goat comes to the door, it's okay. You can let the goat inside. That's fine. But if it's not a deaf goat, don't you let it inside." "How will I know whether it's a deaf goat or not?" the baby goat asked. The mother goat thought for a moment and told the baby goat to look out of the small window in the door and ask the goat what he thinks of the wolf. If it's a deaf goat, well, then it'll sign "Down with the wolf." And that's how you'll know it's a deaf goat, and you can open the door and let it in. "Okay," signed the baby goat. "I'll ask what it thinks of the wolf, and it's supposed to answer, 'Down with the wolf.'" "That's right, you sure are smart," said the mother. Then the mother goat kissed the baby goat, took it into the house, locked the door, and she went off shopping. Now, it happened that the wolf was hiding nearby and saw everything that went on. And the wolf knew how to sign just a little bit because he'd often seen the goat signing and had picked up a few signs. So the wolf took off for home, and he went through all of his old books until he found what he was looking for, a book of signs. So first he looked up the sign wolf, and he tried to imitate the picture as best he could. Wolf, Then he looked up the next sign. He tried again to copy it the best he could. Well, he had a little trouble getting his baby fingers to cooperate. No matter how hard he tried, they just wouldn't work right. He struggled and struggled, but he said, "Oh, that's good enough. It wouldn't matter." So he started off. Then he thought, "Oh, I have to have horns like a goat." Well, the last year, a goat had left his horns lying around, so he put them on until he looked just like a goat to his own satisfaction. Then off he went to the goat's house. As he neared the door, he thought maybe he should practice one last time, so he practiced his signs, "Down with the wolf, down with the wolf." Well, he was still having trouble with his pinky fingers, but he thought that old goat will never notice. So he knocked on the door. Oh, and then he remembered that the goat was deaf. Knocking wouldn't do any good, so he rang the doorbell. And sure enough, the lights inside the house flashed. And when the little goat saw the flashing light, she went to the door, looked out the window, and signed, "Tell me what you think of the wolf." The wolf immediately signed what he thought was "Down with the wolf." But the little goat noticed immediately that the wolf signed just the way non-deaf people sign, which is not the way deaf people sign. And the little goat knew that the wolf wasn't deaf and so couldn't come into the house. Well, the wolf was puzzled. He'd thought he'd signed "Down with the wolf" correctly. He even checked the book to make sure he'd done it right. And what we learn from the story is, if you want to learn to sign, don't try to learn from a book. Instead, socialize with deaf people, and then you'll really learn. And what we learn from the story is, if you want to learn to sign, don't try to learn from a book. Instead, socialize with deaf people, and then you'll really learn.
The Mole and His Mother. There was once a little mole who told his mother that despite what she said, he wasn't blind, he could see. His mother just looked at him and knew she had to find a way to get through to him. So she found some frankincense, held it up in front of her son, and asked him what it was. The little mole looked and finally said, "It's just a pebble." "See there," said the mother mole, "you can't smell and you can't see." What we learn from this story is, it's better not to brag. Because if you brag about your abilities, you're likely to find out all the things you can't do. The Mole and His Mother. There was once a little mole who told his mother that despite what she said, he wasn't blind, he could see. His mother just looked at him and knew she had to find a way to get through to him. So she found something very fragrant and, using tactile signs, asked him what it was she was holding. The little mole looked and finally said, "It's a pebble." "That just shows you," said the mother. "Your nose doesn't work right, and neither do your eyes." What we learn from this story is, it's better not to brag. Because if you brag about your abilities, you're likely to find out all the things you can't do.
The Eagle and the Jackdaw. There was once a jackdaw who sat under a blue sky overlooking the farm. And as he looked around, he noticed a majestic eagle soaring in the distance. As he tracked the powerful bird, he noticed a sheep in the corner of the farm, just standing there and grazing. The eagle swooped down, picked up the sheep in its powerful talons, and flew off. Well, the jackdaw was most impressed, and after giving the matter some thought, decided that he was just as strong as the eagle and could do exactly what the eagle had done. So the jackdaw fluttered its wings as fast as he could, and he took off. Higher and higher he flew and flew until he spotted a sheep down below. He tried his clumsy best to swoop down, and finally he landed on the sheep's back and stuck its claws in and tried to fly off with it. Now, the sheep turned out really to be a ram with huge horns, and it looked back at the jackdaw, asked what it was doing, and went back to its grazing. The jackdaw tried and tried to fly away with the ram, but it couldn't. And to make things worse, its claws had become stuck in the ram's wool. Now the shepherd had noticed all of this, and with the slightest of grins walked over to the ram, and he freed the jackdaw, after first clipping its wings, and then he set it on the ground. A little girl was walking nearby, and the shepherd called her over. She asked, what was that strange-looking bird? Well, she'd never seen anything like it before. Well, said the shepherd, that's a jackdaw. This little black bird thinks it's just like an eagle. And what we learn from this story is, if you are overly boastful and self-centered, that can lead to arrogance, and then sure enough, you'll be caught by your own incompetence. And what we learn from this story is, if you are overly boastful and self-centered, that can lead to arrogance, and then sure enough, you'll be caught by your own incompetence.
Two goats. High up on a mountainous valley lived two goats, one on either side of the valley, separated by a raging river. Now these two goats played to their heart's content, each on their own side of the valley. After a while, though, they each wanted to cross over to the other side. Now it happened that a tree had fallen across the steep valley, forming a bridge. But none of the animals had been brave enough to try to cross over the tree, because it wasn't very thick. Even the little squirrels were afraid to cross. Naturally, if none of the other animals weren't brave enough, neither were the two goats. But those goats were filled with pride and stubbornness. And so, they each got on that fallen tree and started across. When they got to the middle, each wanted the other to move out of the way. And of course, each refused, and they got into a terrible fight, so terrible that they fell off the tree into the river and were washed away. What we learn from this story is that stubbornness and arrogance can really mess things up. Politeness and cooperation will make things work out much better. What we learn from this story is that stubbornness and arrogance can really mess things up. Politeness and cooperation will make things work out much better.
The Brave Little Tailor. One warm and sunny Sunday morning, a tailor was busily working in his shop, making shirts, dresses, and trousers. He loved his work and sewed away with joy. Outside, down on the street, a woman carrying a large basket walked through the streets shouting, "Jams for sale! Jams for sale!" Now the tailor loved jam, and he remembered how delicious her jams were. So when he heard her, he went to his window and asked her to come up, that he wished to buy some of her jam. The woman trudged up 3 flights of stairs with the heavy load. When she opened her basket, the tailor surveyed her jams, took one, and smelled its delicious aroma, and bought it. Well, the woman was a little bit put out that after her long climb up the stairs, the tailor bought only 1 jar of jam, but she quietly descended down the long stairs and walked away, grumbling. The tailor immediately sliced off a huge slab of bread and slathered it with a thick layer of jam. But he didn't eat it right away because he wanted to finish a coat he was working on first. As he worked diligently to finish the coat, he could smell the tempting aroma of the jam. In fact, the aroma filled the room and wafted out the window. Passing flies caught the scent and flew in through the window. And soon the slice of bread with the jam on it was covered with a host of flies. The tailor was furious when he saw them, and began to curse them and call them all sorts of names and ordered them out of his room. The flies ignored his tongue-lashing and continued eating their jam. The tailor was so angry that he hurriedly finished the coat, cut off a piece of cloth, rolled it up, took careful aim, and swatted the flies on the jam. With one mighty blow, the flies scattered in every direction. 7 of them, however, lay dead on the table. With one flashing blow, he had slain 7 flies. As the tailor munched on the bread and jam, he felt mighty proud of himself. "Just think," he said to himself, 7 flies with just one swat. What a feat! He considered the deed of such heroic size that he felt the whole town should know of it. So, he took a sash and embroidered on it in huge words, 7, with one blow. He tied the sash around his waist and started out into town. When the thought occurred to him that his accomplishment was much too grand to be confined just to this little burg, he decided the whole wide world must know of his achievement. In preparation for his journey, he placed a large old chunk of cheese into his coat pocket, and then he set out. He walked through the streets and out the town gate. Just as he emerged through the gate, he spotted a bird that was tangled up in a bush growing by the gate. So he removed the bird from the bush and shoved it into his pocket with the lump of cheese. The tailor walked into the countryside at a brisk pace, never once tiring. He climbed a high mountain, and at the top he found a huge giant. The giant was sitting there observing the countryside. "Hi, what are you doing?" asked the tailor. "Oh, I'm just looking at the world," the giant answered. "Say, why don't you join me in my travels and see the world?" asked the tailor. The giant looked disdainfully at the tailor and said, "What? Me go traveling with a puny little squirt like you? Beat it." "Hold on there," said the tailor. "I'm not as puny as you think. Why, take a look at what's written on this sash." The tailor pulled his coat to reveal the sash and asked, "What do you see?" The giant read the inscription, 7 with one blow, and he imagined that it meant that the tailor had killed 7 men with one blow. His opinion of the tailor quickly changed to one of awe, but then he began to suspect that maybe the tailor was a phony and decided to put him to the test. "Before I set out on my journey with you, I want to give you a test. How about it?" The giant took a stone and said, "Now watch what I do with this rock." And he began to squeeze the stone. His fist crushed the rock to pieces, and out of it fell several drops of water. "Can you do that?" "Is that all?" the tailor said. "Why, that's nothing. Anyone can do that." So saying, the tailor took the lump of cheese from his pocket, bid the giant to watch closely, and began to squeeze it. Water poured from his hand like a running faucet. Well, this mightily impressed the giant. But he decided to give the tailor another test. "See this rock?" said the giant as he picked up another stone. "I'll throw it so far that it will disappear completely from sight. Think you can do that?" "Child's play," the tailor said, as if he were bored to death. With a powerful heave, the giant flung the rock. It sailed a great distance, and the tailor was impressed with the giant's strength. But the rock came to earth, and the tailor said, Well, that wasn't so far. It landed over there, and I can still see it. Watch what I can do. The tailor then took from his pocket the bird he had captured and hurled it into the sky. Well, the bird was so happy to be free, it flew until it was out of sight. Well, this made a big impression on the giant, especially that the rock completely disappeared in the sky. He was still not convinced, however, so he challenged the tailor to lift and carry a heavy object. "Show it to me," said the tailor. So the giant took the tailor over to a huge oak tree that had only recently been chopped down. "Can you lift that?" "Well, I'll tell you what," said the tailor. "You take one end of the tree, and I'll take the other, where the limbs are." Now, you know that the end of the tree with the limbs is a lot lighter than the bottom end of the tree, but the giant did not think of this, and so agreed. So the giant heaved the huge tree onto his shoulder and called out, "Ready?" "All right, let's go," said the tailor, and the giant started walking. But the little tailor had climbed up into the branches of the tree and relaxed. The giant was curious to see how the tailor was doing, but he couldn't turn his head because of the huge tree trunk. When he turned to see, the tree turned with him, so it was useless. After a long walk, the giant declared he was tired and that the test had gone on long enough, so he put down the tree. The tailor jumped out of the limbs and pretended to set his end of the tree on the ground. "What's up?" said the tailor. "Don't tell me a big, strong fellow like you is tired already." The giant felt a little sheepish, but he spied a cherry tree full of red, ripe, delicious cherries, and he plucked some from the top of the tree and ate the juicy cherries. The tailor was too short to reach them, so the giant bent the tree over to let the little tailor get at them. When the tailor grabbed a handful of cherries, the giant let go the tree, and it flung the tailor over the top of the tree and into the field. "What's the matter?" said the giant. "You're not so hot after all. You can't even hold a tree back by yourself." "Oh, that wasn't it," said the tailor. "What happened was I saw a man with a gun, and so I jumped over the tree to get out of his sight. Can you jump over the tree like I did?" The giant accepted the challenge, but after several times of bouncing off the tree, he gave up. He couldn't do it. "I did it, and you couldn't," sneered the little tailor. The giant kind of ignored his remark and allowed that he was sleepy and invited the tailor to join him in the giant's cave. "Oh, you sleep in a cave, do you?" said the tailor. "Why, sure, I'd like to join you." The cave was filled with giants, all sitting around a fire and eating sheep. Well, they were not eating parts of a sheep like a leg, but each one was gnawing on a whole sheep. The little tailor was greatly impressed. The cave was so big you could have put his whole shop inside of it. The giant showed the tailor to a bed and invited him to spend the night on it. It was so big, though, that the little tailor couldn't get comfortable on it. So he wandered on farther down into the cave. After a while, the cave became small enough that he felt comfortable, so he lay down and went to sleep. Along about midnight, the giants got to talking among themselves that they ought to fix that little tailor. They got a long iron bar, crept over to the bed, and smashed it to smithereens with the bar. They declared with a smile that it was the end of that little tailor. The next morning, the giants walked out of the cave, completely forgetting about the little tailor. Then they heard someone whistling, turned to see who it was, and were dumbfounded to see that it was the little tailor, alive and merry. The sight of the tailor terrified them, because he had done away with 7 men in one blow, so they all fled. The little tailor walked nonchalantly on his way, ignoring the fleeing giants. Along about sundown, he came to the king's palace. He was too tired, though, to go in, so he lay down on a patch of soft, spongy grass and fell soundly asleep. Presently, the king's soldiers returned from their day in the field and noticed the tailor sleeping by the roadside. One of them got off his horse to inspect the tailor and immediately noticed the sash with the lettering 7 in one blow on it. This scared the soldiers, and they decided they'd better inform the king about it immediately. The soldiers advised the king that since there were no wars to be fought and all was peaceful, that it would be safe to invite the tailor into the palace, that he could perhaps be a future protection for the king. The king agreed and ordered that the tailor be invited in and given work to do. The soldiers returned to the sleeping tailor, but did not wish to waken him. So they stood by the whole night, and when the tailor awoke the next morning and saw the soldiers standing around him, he inquired as to what was going on. "The king wants to make you an officer in the army," one of the soldiers said. "And that's exactly why I came here, to talk to the king," the tailor said. The soldiers escorted the tailor into the palace, where he walked between rows of trumpeters who paid him high honor with their fanfares. The king showed the tailor to a luxurious room and dressed the tailor in a fine uniform. The tailor expressed his gratitude for everything. Then the soldiers began talking among themselves about the tailor, and some of them were getting jealous of the special treatment he was getting. The leader reminded them of the sash and declared that he could kill 7 of them with one blow if they decided to challenge him. Well, this frightened them so much that they all started resigning from the army. The army was finally reduced to just one man, the tailor, and this brought on a terrible state of depression in the king. The king decided he had to get rid of the tailor, but he was cautious about it because of the tailor's reputation of killing 7 with one blow. He was fearful that the tailor would kill him and take over the kingdom. Finally, he hit upon the plan and summoned the tailor. "I have a job for you," said the king. "There are a couple of giants who have been very troublesome to me. They've been killing people and livestock and burning crops and stealing and plundering. I want you to go kill those giants. And when you've done that, you may have my daughter's hand in marriage and half of my kingdom." "Is that all?" said the tailor. "2 of them? Why, I've killed 7. I won't even work up a sweat with just 2. The king said he would send 100 soldiers along with him. The tailor smiled at the offer and went out to seek the giants with the 100 soldiers following him. When they reached the edge of the forest, the tailor got off his horse and said to the soldiers, "You stay here. I don't need you. See what it says on my sash? You'd just be in the way." And the tailor went in and scoured the forest until finally he found the 2 giants. They were sound asleep and snoring like sawmills. Each time they breathed in and out, the tops of the trees swayed with the wind from their snoring. The tailor filled his pocket with rocks and climbed up into one of the trees. It took skill because the tree was swaying pretty hard. And when he got himself situated among the topmost limbs, he threw a rock at one of the giants, and that awakened him. The giant elbowed the other giant awake and asked why he had hit him while he was sleeping. Well, the other giant denied he had done any such thing. "You must have been dreaming, because I didn't lay a hand on you," said the second giant. And they argued for a while, then dropped off to sleep again. When the tailor was sure they were sound asleep, he threw another rock, this time at the second giant. And he jumped up and pushed the other giant and punched him. "What'd you do that for?" yelled the giant who was punched. "That's to get even with you for punching me while I was asleep," the other giant shouted. And they argued about it as to who hit who for a while until they grew weary of it, dropped off to sleep again. Then the tailor took a huge rock and threw it down at the first giant again. This time, the 2 giants got up and went at each other tooth and nail. They yanked up trees and began beating each other with them. Each one declared his innocence of having hit the other while they were sleeping, and they beat up on each other for quite a while until both of them, fell down dead. The tailor, who had watched all the fighting, carefully climbed out of the tree, took one of the giant's swords, and stabbed each one of them until he was sure they were dead. When the tailor walked out of the forest, he said to the soldiers, "Well, that's taken care of." When the soldiers expressed their doubt about his success, he told them to go in and have a look for themselves. And sure enough, the soldiers found the two giants in a huge pool of blood. When the soldiers reported to the king what they had seen, he was really upset because he did not want to lose his daughter and half his kingdom. The king told the tailor he had a second chore for him to accomplish. The tailor acted a little brash, but said that he would do it and asked what it was. "There's a unicorn," said the king, "who's been destroying trees in my forest by ripping them apart with his horn. I want you to get rid of the unicorn." "That's it?" the tailor asked. Well, he was incensed. "First I kill 7 with one blow, and then you send me out to kill just 2, and now it's just 1. Why, that's kid stuff." Nevertheless, the tailor rode out into the forest with the 100 soldiers behind him. "I told you once that I don't need you," said the tailor, "so stay out of my way." A little ways into the woods, the tailor spotted the unicorn, and it spotted him. The unicorn rushed at the tailor with all its speed and might, and the tailor taunted the unicorn. And as the unicorn got almost to him, the tailor, who was agile as a rabbit, jumped to one side, and the unicorn missed him, burying his horn so deeply into a tree that he couldn't pull it out. The tailor then took a rope and tied it around the unicorn's neck. Next, he cut off the unicorn's horn so that nothing but a little stub remained, and he led the unicorn out of the forest to where the soldiers were waiting. The tailor and the soldiers then returned from the forest with the unicorn shorn of his horn. When the tailor demanded his reward, the king hemmed and hawed until he could think up another scheme to foil the tailor. "Well, there's just one more thing I need for you to do for me," said the king. "What is it?" said the tailor in a bored tone of voice. "Well, there's a wild boar who's been giving me a lot of trouble, and I want you to get rid of it," said the king. The tailor expressed his disgust at such a trivial job, then went with a bunch of hunters to the forest where the boar was. He told the hunters he certainly did not need their assistance, and marched off into the woods by himself. As the tailor walked through the woods, he saw a small chapel. He inspected it, and then made sure that the front door was slightly ajar. He continued into the woods until he spied the boar. He waved and yelled to get its attention. When the boar saw the tailor, it charged at him at full speed. The tailor waited until the last second, then made a dash for the chapel, leaped through the door, and hid behind it. The boar came charging into the chapel, and the tailor leaped like a grasshopper right out the window, ran around, and slammed the door shut, trapping the boar inside the chapel. The boar had no way out, because he was too big and fat to jump up through the window. Then the tailor went to fetch the hunters to witness his catch. They could hardly believe it, but when they peeked through the window at the boar, they had to agree that the tailor had done the deed. The tailor ordered them to report his success to the king. When the hunters told the king that the boar was captured by the tailor, the king gave in and kept his promise. He even gave his daughter to the tailor for his wife, and divided his kingdom in 2, and gave half to the tailor. Sometime later, the tailor, who was now a king, talked in his sleep. His young queen awoke and listened. The tailor was saying, "Hey ho, dum and deedle, sew the clothes with a speedy needle. Snip the scissors with a hard click, or else I'll belt you with my yardstick. Well, when the queen heard this, she realized with dismay that the tailor was not from a noble family, but rather he was nothing more than a lowly commoner. It disgusted her to think that she was married to a tailor. "Oh, father," she said later to the king, "the man you made me marry is nothing more than a common tailor. I'm so distraught. I don't want to be married to a tailor, father. Truly, I don't." The king pondered what he could do, then called in his aides, and in consultation with them decided on a plot. He told the queen that that night, after the tailor went to sleep, she was to get up, open the door slightly so that the aides could go in, and they could capture him, tie him up, and put the tailor on a boat and ship him off to the other side of the world. "Then we'll be free of him, and you can live happily," said the king. There was one aide, however, who was not sure that this was a good plan. After all, the tailor had killed 7 with one blow and was not a man to be taken lightly. The aide called the tailor aside and told him of the king's plan. The tailor thanked the aide for telling him and assured the aide that he would take care of everything and not to worry about it. That night the tailor kissed his queen, and the two of them got into their beds. The queen waited until she thought the tailor was asleep, and then she got out of bed, opened the door, and went back into bed. The tailor, however, was only pretending to be asleep, and he pretended to talk in his sleep, saying, "Hey ho, dum and deedle, sew those clothes with a speedy needle. Snip the scissors with a hard click, or else I'll belt you with my yardstick." Or like the giants, boar and unicorn, or any man of woman born, should he attempt my life to take, shall find me waiting wide awake. Well, when the aides waiting outside the door heard this, they fled the palace in terror. After that, things went on without any more trouble. When the old king died, the tailor became king of all the kingdom, and by his side was the queen, who had learned now to be humble and quiet in her lot. And the tailor's sash, with its 7 with one blow, had worked its magic indeed. How 6 made their way in the world. Once there was a young man who set out to seek adventure and to make his fortune in the world. He had only just set upon his journey when he saw something very strange. A giant of a man, with mountains of muscles, was ripping up trees by their roots and then tying them in huge bundles. The young man approached the muscle man and said, "Would you like to accompany me on my adventure to see the world?" "Why, sure," said the muscle man, so the two of them continued on their journey. Presently, they came upon a man sitting by the road, staring off into the distance. They watched him for a few moments, and then the young man asked him what he was staring at. "Oh," the man answered, "I'm reading a book." "Reading a book?" the young man exclaimed. "I don't see a book. What book?" "Oh, pardon me," said the man. "Do you see that house about a mile over there? Well, there's a lady sitting by the window reading a book, and I'm reading it too." "Wow," said the young man. "I can barely see the house, let alone the book. You sure have keen eyesight." The man said, "Yep, I do." "Well, how about coming along with us on our adventure to see the world?" "Why, sure," said Sharp Eyes. So the three of them proceeded down the road on their journey. Soon they came upon a man sitting by the road. With his thumb, he had closed one side of his nose, and he was blowing out the other side. The young man noticed that there were several windmills in the distance, and it was the wind from the man's nose that made them turn. "What powerful lungs that man has," the young man thought. "We're off on an adventure to see the world. Would you like to join us?" the young man asked. "I sure would," said Strong Lungs, as he rose and joined the party. After some time, they came upon a man sitting by the road with one leg bent back, so that his foot was tied to the back of his thigh. The young man asked why his leg was tied up like that. And the man answered, "Well, you see, I'm such a fast runner that if I don't tie up one leg, I'll run away with myself. I'll have to hop around on one leg just to keep from running off." "No kidding," said the young man. "Oh, I'm so fast I can outrun a horse using just my one leg," said the man. "That's incredible," said the young man. "Hey, how about joining us on our adventure to see the world?" "Sure," said Mighty Leg. And so, using crutches because he was on one leg, he joined the party. On they journeyed together until they came upon a man sitting by the road with his hat way over on one side of his head. The young man said, "That's a funny way to wear your hat. Why don't you just wear it on the top of your head?" "Well," said the man, "you see, the way I wear my hat determines the weather. I control whether it's hot, cold, rainy, and so on. When I wear it like this, it keeps sunny and warm, and if I wear it on top, it gets freezing cold." "That's unbelievable," exclaimed the young man. "Say, we're on an adventure to see the world. How would you like to come along with us?" "Okay," said Weather Hat, and he too joined the group. And they journeyed on and on until they came to the city where the king of the land lived. Well, there was a lot of excitement among the people there, so the young man asked one of them what was going on. "Well, the king has said he's about to make an important announcement, and so we're all going to the castle to see what he has to say." The 6 friends decided they would go along too and find out what the great news was. In the great castle, the king rose to make his announcement. "It is time," he said, "for my daughter to be married, so I've decided that whoever can beat her in a foot race shall have her hand in marriage and be a son to me. But," he continued, "there is a catch. Whoever races her and loses will also lose his head." Well, no one was willing to race for fear of losing. "Not I, not I," they all said. And the king's daughter, who was a bit arrogant, said, "What's the matter? Are you all cowards?" A voice spoke up from the 6 friends and said, "I'll race you." It was Mighty Leg. And the king looked at him and said, "How are you going to race with one leg?" "Oh, don't worry," said Mighty Leg, "I can do it." "You'd better untie that leg," the king said. "No, I don't need both legs to beat her," Mighty Leg answered. "Have it your own way," the king said. "But remember, if you lose, off comes your head." "That suits me," said Mighty Leg. Then the king gave each of them a large pitcher and said, "You must take these pitchers to the spring that's about a mile away, fill them to the brim, and then race all the way back. The first one to arrive here with a full pitcher of water wins." Is that clear? The two said it was clear and got ready to race. And the king said, "Ready, set, go!" The king's daughter took off like a bullet, but she was no match for Mighty Leg. On his one leg, he passed her as if she were standing still. He filled his pitcher at the spring and was halfway back to the castle when the king's daughter passed him on her way to the spring. Oh, Mighty Leg decided that he was so far ahead he could afford to sit down and rest. But unfortunately, he dozed off. And while he slept, the king's daughter arrived at the spring, filled her pitcher, and was dashing back to the castle when she tripped, and she fell and spilled the water from her pitcher. That happened just near the sleeping Mighty Leg, so she grabbed his pitcher and started off for the castle. Just as she ran off, Mighty Leg awoke. He saw that she had taken his pitcher and left him the empty one. Quickly, he untied his leg, grabbed the pitcher, zipped off to the spring, filled it, and then tore out for the castle. He whizzed past the king's daughter and just won the race. Well, the king wasn't too happy about this, but he had made a promise, so he told Mighty Leg that he could have his daughter. She wasn't happy about it either, and said she didn't want to marry Mighty Leg. The king thought for a moment and then said to Mighty Leg, "Well, instead of my daughter, how about if I give you gold?" Mighty Leg considered this and asked, "How much gold?" And the king said, "Oh, I'll give you as much gold as you can lift and carry all by yourself." Mighty Leg said, "That sounds all right, but will it be all right if one of my friends carries the gold instead of me?" The king agreed. So Mighty Leg called on Muscle Man to come and carry the gold. Muscle Man asked for the largest bag that could be found. The king agreed and filled the bag. Muscle Man lifted it as if it were empty and said, "More gold." And the king ordered that more gold be brought, and the bag was filled until it nearly split. Muscle Man lifted the bag easily and said to bring more gold. The king was astonished and a bit gloomy to see so much of his gold disappear into the bag. Nevertheless, every tiny single bit of gold in the castle was brought and put into the bag. "I've got no more left," the king moaned. Muscle Man lifted the bag and said, "Well, if that's all you've got, it'll have to do, but I could carry more if you had it." The king, unwilling to lose his gold, said, "Since it's almost sundown, be my guests and spend the night here." The 6 friends consulted among themselves and then agreed to spend the night in the castle. "Oh, good," said the king. "I'll lock your gold up in my strong room where it'll be safe until tomorrow morning." The 6 friends were then conducted to a room. They didn't know that this was a very special room. Its floors, wall, and ceiling were all made of iron. There were no windows and only one door. After they entered the room, the king slammed and locked the door, ran down to the basement, and built a huge fire under the room. He hoped to kill the 6 men in the room. As the heat increased, the 6 friends began to sweat. The heat from the floor and the walls became intense. Fearing for their lives, they tried to open the door, but it was no use. Then they remembered weather hat. He put his hat on the top of his head, and sure enough, it began to grow cool. In fact, it got so cold that the countryside outside was locked in ice and snow. Inside the room, however, it was warm and cozy. The next morning, the king went to the room expecting to find them all dead. But to his amazement and disappointment, the 6 friends were hale and hearty. He conceded that he had lost, so he ushered them out, gave them the gold, and they departed the city and started out on their journey home. The king, however, decided he wanted his gold back, so he called out his army. His soldiers were clad in heavy armor, helmets, lances, and shields. There were about 500 of them in all. His plan was to wait until the 6 friends were far enough away from the city so that the people would not know what he was up to, and then overtake the 6 friends, kill them, and retrieve his gold. The young man, however, suspected that the king would do something to get his gold back, so he told Sharp Eyes to keep a lookout for the king and his army. So every now and then, Sharp Eyes would take a look and see if they were being followed. Finally, Sharp Eyes saw something and said, "It's the king and his army. They're about 5 miles away. They're on horses. I estimate there are about 500 of them." "Okay," the young man said. "When they get about a mile away, let me know." And the 6 friends continued walking until finally Sharp Eyes informed them that the king and his army were about a mile away. "Good," the young man said. "Now, Strong Lungs, I want you to blow with all your breath. Not just with one side of your nose, but through your mouth, and blow the army off the face of the earth. Can you do it?" "Sure," said Strong Lungs. "That's as easy as pie." Strong Lungs took a deep breath, puffed out his cheeks, and blew up a hurricane. Trees were ripped up by their roots. Houses, soldiers, and horses sailed off into the sky in a whirlwind of dust. And when it was all over, not a soldier, horse, nor tree was in sight. It was completely barren. The 6 friends all shook hands and congratulated themselves on their triumph. They divided up the gold evenly among themselves, and then each man returned to his home and lived happily ever after. How 6 made their way in the world. This is a story of how 6 friends made their way in the world. These 6 friends were deaf, and they lived in a city where the school for the deaf was located. They all had attended school together and grown up as very close friends. The school, however, was very old, and its buildings had begun to look a little run down and needed a lot of repair work. The 6 friends felt very sad because of the shabby condition of their beloved school. The king had provided no money to support the school, so the repairs couldn't be made. They decided to go to the king and petition him to provide money to maintain the school. But before I tell you about their adventure, I need to explain about these 6 friends. They had very exceptional abilities. One of them, a woman, was a writer, and was so skilled that everyone called her Pen Lady. And one was a giant of a man. He was huge, with great broad shoulders tapering down to a narrow waist. His arms bulged with muscles on top of muscles, and everyone called him Mighty Man. Another woman in the group had such good eyesight that she could read a book at a distance of a mile away, and everyone called her Sharp Eyes. One of the friends had powerful, powerful lungs. He could blow up a tornado with just one cheekful of air. He was called by one and all Puff Cheek. A third woman was a sprinter. She could run so fast she had to keep one leg tied up and hop around on the other leg, or else she would run away with herself. So, naturally, she was called One Leg. The last friend was a man with an enchanted hat. If he wore it on the side of his head, the weather would be sunny and warm. If he wore it on the top of his head, it would turn stormy and cold. And he was called Wizard Cap. The 6 friends journeyed to the town where the king lived. When they arrived, they found all the people excitedly talking among themselves. The 6 friends could see the king speaking to the people, so Pen Lady wrote a note asking one of the citizens what was going on. The person recognized she was deaf and wrote back explaining that the king had declared that there would be a great race and whoever won it would be rewarded with gold. But whoever lost the race would also lose his head. So Pen Lady asked who was to run the race. She was told that it was one of the king's soldiers who was the fastest man in all the kingdom. The 6 friends talked among themselves about winning the gold and using it to fix up their school. One Leg was asked if she thought she could win the race, and she answered that of course she was absolutely sure she could win and was eager to get in the race. So Pen Lady wrote a note to the king explaining their wish for One Leg to compete in the race. When the king read the note, he asked how in the world a person on one leg, especially a woman, could hope to beat his soldier. It was a preposterous idea, he said. I know I can beat him, One Leg insisted. Are you afraid to let him run against me? Afraid? I should say not, the king snorted. Remember this, though. If you lose, you and all your friends will lose your heads. Fine, that doesn't worry us a bit, replied One Leg. The king agreed to the race and then gave the soldier and One Leg each a large pitcher. He told them that they must race to the spring a mile away and fill the pitchers to the brim. Then the first one to bring back a full pitcher of water would be declared the winner. After asking if his instructions were clear, he started the runners off on the race. The soldier was fast, but not fast enough. One Leg left him in a cloud of dust, and within a few minutes arrived at the spring. As she dashed back, she met the soldier who was only halfway to the spring, and she decided that since she was so far ahead, she'd sit down and rest. She sat her pitcher down beside her, and as luck would have it, she fell asleep. Meanwhile, the soldier reached the spring, filled his pitcher, and started back. When he got to where One Leg was sleeping, he stumbled, fell, and spilled the water in his pitcher. He saw One Leg's pitcher, grabbed it, and ran off. Now, that was cheating, but you know how some people are. The One Leg awoke, saw the spilled water in the empty pitcher, and realized what had happened. She untied her other leg, grabbed the pitcher, and tore off for the spring. She filled the pitcher and flew like the wind, passing the soldier and winning the race. The king was dismayed, but he had promised gold to the winner. He asked if One Leg was to carry the gold, and she said no, one of her friends would, and then she beckoned Mighty Man over. Piles and piles of gold were brought and stacked in Mighty Man's arms, but he seemed not to notice the terrific weight and kept signaling for more and more gold to be piled on. The king was flabbergasted. He had piled up every piece of gold in his castle, yet Mighty Man stood there beckoning for more. They were, after all, only following the rules the king had set up. The king, not eager to see all of his gold depart, invited the 6 friends to spend the night at the castle. Oh, they could leave in the morning after breakfast, he said. Since the sun was almost down, the 6 friends agreed to accept the king's invitation. The gold was locked in a safe, and then the king conducted the 6 friends to their room. It was a special room. The floor, walls, and ceiling were made of iron, and it had no windows. After the 6 friends had entered the room, the king slammed and locked the door. Then he dashed down into the basement. Beneath the room, he built a roaring fire. His plan was to kill the 6 friends with the heat from the fire. Inside the room, the 6 friends began to sweat profusely as the heat increased. They asked Wizard Cap to do something about it, so he moved his cap from the side of his head to the top of his head. And sure enough, it got so cold the fire went out. The next morning, the king rushed to the room expecting to find the 6 friends dead. But when he opened the door, they all stood smiling at him. "We're ready to go," they said. The king could think of no way to stop them, so he let them go with Mighty Man carrying all of his gold. Pen Lady told Sharp Eyes to keep a lookout for the king. "I don't trust him," said Pen Lady. "He's a liar and he's very greedy. I'm afraid he's going to try and capture us." Sharp Eyes watched the road behind them and saw the king and his army. "Oh," she exclaimed, "there's about 500 of them suited out with armor, shields, spears, and they're all on horses. It's terrible." Pen Lady was calm and asked Puff Cheek if he thought he could blow not with one but with both cheeks and destroy the army. "No problem," said Puff Cheek. He then filled his lungs with air and blew up such a hurricane that trees were blown over, houses disappeared, and the soldiers were last seen riding their horses high in the sky. And when the dust cleared, there wasn't a thing left standing. Everything was bare. When the 6 friends arrived back in their hometown, they immediately used the gold to build a completely new and beautiful school, and a new clubhouse, and lots of other things for the deaf community. Everyone was delighted with all of the new wonderful buildings, and they lived happily ever after.